Hi guys, welcome to Just My Opinion. I am reading something that I wrote, so if you see me look off to the sides because I'm reading, okay? So let me get started. We live in a society that is so deeply rooted in shame, guilt, and depravity that the very ones who oppress us has actually become fragile. There are whites and some blacks, unfortunately, who have become so blinded by their own ignorance that they actually believe racism is practically non existent. They believe that unless you are wearing a sheet over your head and burning crosses, that you could not possibly be a racist person. They even go as far as to point out each non-white person they know and have befriended. So you'll hear things like, my best friend is black, my brother married a black woman, and I love her. As if those proclamations prove their non-racism and excludes them from those people. You know, the ones who intentionally go out to hurt, offend, exclude, ostracize, and even as far as kill black people or people of color. In their minds, somehow that is the only example of true racism. Here's the failure. Racism is not individualized to backwoods inbred families who want to keep their race pure. Racism is structural. In order for us to accept this deeply embedded, covert, systematic issue, we must first address those who do not truly understand how this ignorance affects all of us. There is a historical, factual, extremely impactful system specifically created to benefit whites and whites only. It has been taken for granted by whites for centuries, and due to its deep DNA roots, it is only recognized when it's pointed out. And this, my people, is where white fragility comes in. According to Dr. Robin DiAngelo, a white doctor who actually goes around teaching white people about their racism, has two beliefs that prevent whites from seeing racism as a system. Those two beliefs are the following. Number one, that racists are bad people. And number two, that racism is a conscious dislike. Therefore, if it isn't an obvious dislike or a conscious effort of hatred, then racism simply doesn't exist. And those particular white people are not racist. This error in this line of thinking is that racism is an intentional, purposeful thought process instead of what it really is, a system in which we are all socialized into. In fact, most racism is not the obvious white sheets and swastikas, but an unconscious, sneaky, psychologically embedded fact. How so? Very simple. Turn to the news and watch what's going on in today's society. Let's take this terrorist act that occurred recently at Emmanuel AME in South Carolina. This man intentionally went into this historical place of worship and violently murdered 9 people at a Bible study. According to the FBI, domestic terrorism is defined as involving acts dangerous to human life that violate federal and or state law, appear intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of government by intimidation or coercion, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily within the territory jurisdiction of the U.S. In fact, in the late 1860s, racial terrorism in the South was ubiquitous, so much so that the law, which is actually called the Enforcement Act of 1871, is actually typically known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. The Ku Klux Klan is the first ever recognized national terrorist group. In today's times, terrorism is now so seemingly synonymously used when only referencing Muslims, especially after 9/11. Once again, this idea is ingrained in our thoughts, our actions, and minds on a daily basis to the point where we don't even know any different. We can't possibly see that terrorism is an act and not just a group of people. So, was this heinous crime that this animal committed terrorism? Absolutely, by definition. This person, who I will not name and honor him, was murdered in cold blood 9 people in a historical place of worship. He actually tweeted a picture of himself wearing a jacket with flags from the apartheid era South Africa and nearby Rhodesia, a former British colony that was ruled by white minority until it became independent in 1980 and renamed Rwanda. Authorities say that he intended on starting a race war, which is further proof that he wanted to intimidate or coerce civilian population into more possible violence. So by all means, he has executed a terroristic act. Period. I don't think I need to waste my time by pointing out the obvious differences in this arrest versus the intentional murder of Walter Scott in that very same city for simply running away. In fact, Walter's dead body was even framed to make it look like he was carrying a weapon so to justify the murderous intentions of the police officer, when in fact he had nothing on him. But racism is only prevalent amongst those wearing white sheets? Are you sure? Bring this matter up to a white person and you may get varying responses. However, I can promise this much. While some might digress and admit to the injustice and obvious racism, few will truly see it for what it really is. They will not see the systematic approach white men and women have towards people of color in any situation, be it threatening or non-threatening, in comparison to the response to their own counterparts in similar situations. I've even seen white people on Facebook, myself, implore everyone on Facebook to stop perpetuating the Charleston story. They say things like, and I've read this as early as recent as today. Let's not make this about race, guys. It's more about crazy people than about race. All people of all races are crazy, so why are we just focused on white people? Okay. That, my people, is the very epitome of white fragility. That is the very idea of an in-depth discussion on racism makes them so uncomfortable that they would run in the opposite direction, hiding under the guise of peace. That is not peace, my people. That is denial. That is guilt and shame wrapped up in a cute, itty-bitty little blanket called sarcasm and humor. White fragility makes you feel like an ass for expressing your feelings on racism. What they do is they silently, jokingly, sarcastically bully you into silence because of their own discomfort. Some might even lash out on you if they feel backed into a corner enough or when they've had enough of it. You'll hear and see comments like, well, maybe if the victim wasn't so blank, or if they did nothing wrong, well, why did they run? See, these fragile souls will unconsciously seek to justify the heinous actions of the perpetrator by pointing out the actions of the victim. That is, by all means and accounts, racism, people. The sneaky, underlying, unconscious kind of racism. The kind that burns and lives so deeply in their DNA that they can't even point it out if they tried. So what do we try to do? We wait, and we wait. And we wait for those obvious signs of racism, and we're quick to point it out. Aha, gotcha. But we're not helping anything by doing that. Because what you're guaranteed to get is pushback. You will get an argument. You will see that they immediately get defensive. This, according to Dr. DiAngelo, is how white people are able to regain position and equilibrium. This is how white fragility works. Some may ask, how can a white person who is adamant that they are not racist recognize the superiority complex that has been bestowed upon them? How can we make them see that white privilege is not only force-fed, but the very fabric of socialization? Well, before we do that, we have to understand what patterns have developed that has made them so. We're not going to talk about slavery or the history of Africa, not in this video, or their historical hatred of us since the beginning of time. No, we're going to talk about modern day. Because a lot of the problem is when white fragility speaks, it says things like, well, the Holocaust happened too. Let's leave the past in the past. Or you'll hear something like, those are my ancestors. It wasn't me. Fine. For the sake of argument, let's do that. I'm going to paraphrase the ideas of Dr. DiAngelo once again, because these are not my original thoughts and I must give credit where it's due. She made a lot of good points, but I'm only going to discuss 3. The first point, segregation. Segregation very much still exists. Whites still, to this day, live, grow, play, learn, work, and pretty much die in social and geographic segregation. I can recall lots of conversations during my travels with white people, and even just at home, who say, I've never seen a black person in real life. Or they don't see a lot of them. Let's just put it that way. They are enamored with my hair. They want to touch it. They want to touch me as if I am a unicorn of some sort. I hear things like, I wish I could be as brown or as tan as you. I've got to go to the tanning salon to get your color. You're gorgeous. The terrible part about this modern segregation is that there is no societal teaching that is a loss to them. There is no loss with lack of cross-racial or interracial relationships in their minds. Across the country, white neighborhoods and white schools are often viewed as the good places to be. That is a prime example of how white supremacy is embedded into the subconscious. This shapes how they view us and the rest of the world. Second point, the good and bad binary. This is the idea that if a white person is nice, doesn't tell a racist joke, hates the N-word, or even has friends of color, that they are automatically disqualified from being racist. It is the idea that a racist person is some big bad monster, someone who they could not bear to be around, and they often refer to those types of people as white trash. This focus is that the issue is individualized instead of communal. That allows them to disassociate themselves from those people, but from the larger issue at hand as well. This labeling allows white people to see themselves as good people because they aren't like those people, those other white people, but fails to allow them to properly analyze the real issue, therefore rendering them useless and challenging the system. They see neutrality as a good thing. The third point is racial arrogance. White people are rarely, if ever, in a place they don't belong. As a result, they have very little understanding of racism because there is no need to teach them the complex ways in which it affects those who actually experience it. And since they are in a position of power from birth, racism is also a foreign term to them that is viewed by them as a discussion for only angry people. It doesn't benefit white dominance to teach them the complexities of racism, so while they'll have general knowledge of the wrongs done to people of color, they're never taught the psychological, physical, or emotional damage it does to us and generations to come. It is often referred to as the race card. When people of color try to explain racial issues, we are easily and quickly dismissed as irrelevant. We get joked, on and passed over and, oh, anyway, race card. Even in school, history books celebrate, fantasize, and commercialize tyrants and murderers as heroes and kings. And when those same white people, being the central focus of American and international history, influential people of color often get a paragraph or a page, if you're lucky, in those same books. That lack of acknowledgement further embeds the sense of superiority, and the arrogance is created to the sense that even history books back up that greatness. How do we address this? There is no overnight cure. Reversing this disease is lifelong, and we will need to be treating it with humility and patience. The education is there, especially now in the information age where knowledge is just a click away or a Google page away. The willingness is there from people of color who want to formally and informally educate those who do not know. A lot of work, however, will honestly be on white people. They cannot be fragile in racism. They have to be willing to tackle it head first, deal with discomfort, deal with honesty, unlearn falsehoods, and relearn truth. You know what they say? The first step in any 12-step program is to admit you have a problem. So let's start there. Peace, guys.